Yes, good Wednesday. You just heard the national anthem, I'm assuming, of Ecuador. What happened 191 years ago is that after a war that Gran Colombia lost to Peru, the Gran Colombia essentially pulled a USSR and split itself into three: Colombia, Ecuador, and Venezuela, which is also why their flags are pretty similar. As a result, because they used to be the same states for quite a few decades. Now, what we're going to go over today is the bunch of new legendaries that have been added in the newest build of the PTR. We have reported on the new legendaries up to this point for all the other classes. What we were missing up to this point was Shaman, it was Warlock, it was Priests, and it was Hunters, which we have gotten today. So let's start with Shaman. Shamans only had two data mined ones, the one for Ventir and the one for Nightwave. So for Ventir, you have Elemental Conduit for Shaman. Each friendly target healed by Chain Harvest automatically has Riptide applied to them. Each enemy target damaged by Chain Harvest automatically has Flame Shock applied to them. So Ventir has Chain Harvest. Chain Harvest has a 90-second cooldown, which can get reduced by 5 seconds whenever it crits, and it can hit 5 allies. So 5 Riptides or 5 enemies, so 5 Flame Shocks. Now, one of the particular things with this legendary is that Restoration Shaman has already a very popular legendary called Primal Tidecore, which allows you to get free Riptides over time, right? Every 3, you get the 4th one for free. So generally speaking, of course, there are many other things to consider, like the extra free Riptide you can get when you cast Primordial Wave if you're playing Necrolord, which you couldn't if you were Ventir. If you exclude that, roughly, more or less, every 90 seconds with the Primal Tidecore legendary, you can get about 5 free Riptides, and this legendary can also give you 5 free Riptides. The main difference is that these 5 Riptides for Ventir would come all at the same time. So this is particularly good if you're playing Restoration Shaman during AoE situations, because you're trying to spread your Riptide as a Shaman, one by one, every 6 seconds, waiting for the recharge, and the big AoE comes down, and it's not that you can do anything different. You still have those charges on a 6-second recharge rate, so that's all you can do. If you use in this legendary, you can use Chain Harvest, first of all to heal during the big damage that's coming, but also to get 5 Riptides out at the same time instantly. Of course, you lose one of the big powers of being able to spread them so quickly, which is the Necrolord Covenant ability, right? Because Primordial Wave also allows you to heal all of the targets affected by Riptide with a healing wave, and you would not be able to do this. So this could be a pretty good legendary for Restoration Shaman, and it would work for both Mythic Plus and Raid encounters. In Mythic Plus, it would be somewhat similar to Divine Toll for Holy Paladin, because in a single cooldown you can cover your entire party with Riptides, just like Holy Paladin can cover the entire party with Holy Shocks immediately. But to be fair, Restoration Shaman in Mythic Plus doesn't really have that many problems to cover the entire party in Riptides already, so this is probably going to be more effective if you want to use this in raids, to try to get as many Riptides out as possible to the entire raid. For Elemental Shaman, this is not as important. Being able to spread 5 Flame Shocks is back in that corner of being very niche, very alternative. It's not going to find much of any use for many bosses. Just take Castelnatria as your de facto comparison. How many times are you going to get a lot of value from being able to get 5 Flame Shocks out at the same time? Essentially, not a single boss outside of Sun King's Salvation, which has adds that are going to die way too quickly for those Flame Shocks to get much of any value. It has a couple of adds on Inerva that you would be able to spread your Flame Shocks, but if it is just a couple of add, then you can do it just fine with Necrolord and Primordial Wave to spread your Flame Shock. Council of Blood, maybe with the 3 bosses, as long as they're up for the first minute and a half or so. The only real thing would probably be Stone Legion Generals, where you could get this off quite often with the ads, and that's it. And then you also have Mythic Plus, which is somewhat similar with the ads dying way too quickly. And even if you have that many Flame Shocks and you get that many resets of Lava Burst, in that time you are more worried about casting Chain Lightning and Earthquake, not Lava Burst. So it does have a very niche and very hard to find situation for Elemental to be worth. The other legendary is Seeds of Rampant Growth. This is even more niche. Each pulse of Fate Transfusion's damage reduces the cooldown of Feral Spirit's Healing Tide Totem and Fire Elemental. Healing Tide Totem is not that important of a cooldown for Restoration Shaman. The big money cooldown for a Restoration Shaman is Spirit Link, so reducing the cooldown of Healing Tide is not that crucial. Also, the cooldown reduction on healer abilities are not that important in comparison with the DPS abilities. So getting your Healing Tide from 3 minutes to 2 minutes 30 is not, that crucial. It could be crucial for Fire Elemental and Feral Spirits. Feral Spirits is pretty good and pretty strong for Enhancement Shaman. They even have their own synergy, their own possible synergy with reducing the cooldown of Feral Spirits further. Unfortunately, it will be cock-blocked because it's on a legendary. When it comes to Elemental, Fire Elemental is not that powerful, it is not that strong. You don't have any other cooldown reduction with this because the other cooldown reduction is also tied to a legendary, so this would also prevent it. So I don't think this one is going to find much use either. If the Ventir one can be niche for Elemental, this one for Night Fae is even more of a niche option. Then we also have gotten the ones for Hunters. There is going to be a pretty interesting one here. So let's go for the other two, for Kyrian and for Necrolord. So Necrolord gets Bag of Munitions. Up to 5 targets hit by your Death Chakram are also hit by Explosive Shot. Now, I'm trying to understand if the way this works is that the Death Chakram turns into an Explosive Shot and therefore the AoE hits 5 targets, or if every target hit by Death Chakram gets an entire application of Explosive Shots. So you get up to 5 different Explosive Shots, all exploding next to each other and all doing the explosion AoE next to each other. That would be much more powerful. That being said, Death Chakram has a 45-second cooldown, so you can basically guarantee every 45 seconds, which will be pretty good in Mythic Plus for many of the pulls, to have this type of very quick, no ramp-up AoE addition to your Necrolord ability. Then you have the Kyrian one, which is Pact of the Soul Stalkers. When your Resonating Arrow deals damage to a target, your party gains 5% increased critical strike chance until it's cancelled. Interesting because this is a support legendary, right? Because you're basically gaining an entire legendary just to gain 5% crit for yourself. Resonating Arrow, that's already what? If you don't play Hunter, that's already what Resonating Arrow does. You gain 30% increased critical strike chance against the target within the arrow ring. So for Hunter, for just the Hunter, this is basically just barely like an 18% extra effectiveness on their own Covenant ability, which is very, very poor. So the power here goes in giving an extra 20%, 5 crit to your other 4 party members. That's all it gets. Which is also why I don't think it's going to be used at all when it comes to people sacrificing their own performance to be supportive, especially if you're a DPS. Very few people are going to go for this. The really interesting one, or rather important one, is going to be for Night Fae. Fragments of the Elder Antlers. When Wild Spirits hits fewer than 5 targets, there is a 200% chance for each target hit to be damaged by Wild Spirits a second time, beyond the meaning of 200% chance. This is interesting because if you have kept track with the bug fixes that happened a few weeks ago, Marksmanship Hunter was benefiting from a bug for the enemies to take 2 hits from Wild Spirits when they were using Serpent Stalker's Trickery legendary. That was a legendary that was making you hit with Serpent Sting every time you would hit with Aim Shot, so Wild Spirits would register it as a double hit, as 2 different abilities, and therefore do double damage. So this legendary is basically going to unnerf that bug and make it even stronger. Because now, if you're doing this, if you're hitting Wild Spirits on less than 5 targets, it's gonna double damage every single time from every one of your abilities. Obviously, it is meant to be restrained. It's not gonna be on a big 20 mob pool in Mythic Plus. It's just gonna be 5 or less, but it is still very powerful. It is particularly powerful because one of the weaknesses of Marksmanship Hunter is single target, is the fact that Wild Spirits, when it's only hitting 1 target or 2 targets, is not getting that much power. So when you can hit 3, 4, or 5, this one gives back a lot of power to Marksmanship Hunter. Of course, you would have to lose. Remember, these are still all legendaries, so you still have to compare them to your current best-in-slot legendary. This is not just a buff that is given to you in 9.1. You actually have to lose something to gain this. So Hunter's Marksmanship would have to lose Serpent Stalker's Trickery, their free Serpent Sting cast on their Aim Shot. Now, this ability seems pretty strong in Mythic Plus, in AoE, when it comes to this type of burst. Bursts particularly strong enough and quick enough that makes the extra Serpent Stings you would get from your current legendary not worth. So this could be interesting. for Marksmanship Hunter. Then we are moving over to Warlocks. Warlocks finally are getting their full 4 legendaries this time. Shard of Annihilation is for Necrolord. Decimating Bolt also increases the critical strike chance and critical strike damage of Demon Bolt, Incinerate, and Shadow Bolt by 15%. For the unawares, Decimating Bolt is the one that has a 45-second cooldown and empowers your next 3 Demon Bolts, your next 3 Incinerates, and your next 3 Shadow Bolts by 100%, so basically double damage on your next 3. This one also gives you critical strike chance and critical strike damage. Now, it seems okay, it seems pretty decent, although it's not that the Warlock specs are currently focused on critical strike. You know, Affliction is haste and mastery, Demonology is tons of haste, and Destruction is also haste and mastery, so all of the 3 specs are not really that into crit. So it's not that gaining 15% crit and crit damage is going to heavily synergize with the current scaling of the 3 specs. One of the decent points you could say is that the legendaries are not super important to the Warlock specs, particularly Affliction, who is taking the boring way out and the random 15% damage buff they can get, so this one could be decent. And also the fact that Necrolord is decently played by Warlocks. To be fair, there is some wiggle room in the Covenant choice for Warlock. Some might say because all 4 are not particularly strong, so there is a possibility to change. They're not locked like you are if you're playing Night Fae for, you know, Wild Spirits or Convoke the Spirits and stuff like that. But this one, I don't think it is that strong, particularly because in the end you also have to consider that the damage of a Demon Bolt for a Demonology Warlock is like 4% of their total damage. You know, it's not one of their main hitters. It could be, particularly with the new conduit to Affliction, if they turned it into Drain Soul instead of Shaman Bolt, it could have some effect, but I don't know. Then we are moving over to Night Fae, Decaying Soul Satchel. Each target affected by Soul Rot increases your haste and your crit by 50% until cancelled. Now, this is particularly interesting because Soul Rot has a 1-minute cooldown and the dot applied by Soul Rot is lasting for 8 seconds. So we could read this as each target affected by Soul Rot increases your haste and crit by 50% for 8 seconds, which is a pretty strong buff if you think about it, you know. 50% crit and haste is a massive buff. 8 seconds, of course, is not a big duration, but it's still very, very big window of damage. Demonology has a pretty decent window for burst in just 8 seconds. Affliction has a decent one as well if they can unload all their Chaos Bolts, drop the Infernal and whatnot. Affliction, yeah, is the slowest one of them. It would have the least amount of impact in just 8 seconds, but it's still pretty good. It can empower your burst, and empowering burst as a legendary is still a very powerful effect. Then you have the Ventir one, which is the least important simply because it is the least played Covenant for Warlock. Contained Perpetual Explosion. Impending Catastrophe's final explosion. Damage is increased by 50% plus 10% for each enemy target hit on its way to its final target. You know, Impending Catastrophe travels to the destination, so if it passes through 6 enemies, it's gonna do an extra 60% damage. This is terrible. This is terrible simply because Impending Catastrophe has gotten nerfed before live by like 100% in the final damage, so this buff would be an entire legendary to make it 2/3 of the damage it used to have. And that was just decent damage for AoE only. In single target it was awful. So it's still not gonna be taken by pretty much anyone unless you are some sort of black sheep, you know, that never plays in raids and just wants to do Mythic Plus, so he wants to go for AoE and he thinks Ventir is gonna be decent. That's pretty much the only situation, the only scenario where this could be considered. The last of the legendaries is going to be for Kyrian, Languishing Soul Detritus. When Scoring Tithe generates soul shards, gain 100% increased move speed and 100% increased critical strike chance for 8 seconds. So this is actually pretty interesting because it's similar in its effect to the one we have gone over for Night Fae. Because Night Fae is 8 seconds of crit chance and haste, 50%, whereas this one is 8 seconds of 100% crit chance. So it is not as powerful, but here's the thing. Scoring Tithe, first of all, doesn't have a 1-minute cooldown like Soul Rot, but has a 40-second cooldown, so it's going to happen more often. And there is the caveat, of course. The caveat is that this is going to proc if you generate soul shards. You only generate soul shards when the target dies. So unfortunately, in pure single-target fights, or even 2-target or 3-target fights where the targets don't die as quickly or as often, think about something like Altimore, You have multiple targets, but it's just, 3 extra, and they live for quite a bit, the second and the third adds. So this means that, for example, on a fight like Sludge Fist, where there is only one target, this legendary is never going to work. Like, literally, it's as if you were using no legendary. It's actually a very unique case, because you basically are not going to get any power from your legendary in the fight, in the entire fight. So it might be good, it might be powerful to use, but there is clearly a caveat here. It only functions in pretty specific situations. Then we are moving to the last of the classes, which is going to be priests. So there is a couple of unconfirmed legendaries. Unconfirmed meaning they've not been put into the actual slots for the Covenant abilities, but they have been data mined anyways, and it looks like that's what they are. You have the Kyrian ones, Fierce Harmony, which is Boon of the Ascended's cooldown is reduced by 2 seconds, up to 60 seconds for each stack of Boon of the Ascended consumed by the Ascended Eruption. It is pretty nice because it's gonna reward better usage of this burst. Now, from checking the logs, Discipline and Shadow have some pretty harsh times. The few Kyrian Shadow Priest have a pretty harsh time getting to the 60-second cooldown reduction. If this was in the game, to get to 60 seconds of cooldown reduction, it seems pretty tough for them. But the payoff, if you actually reach the 60-second max cooldown reduction, would be very powerful, because you would be able to make this one line up with Power Infusion. And therefore, Power Infusion with faster haste would also help you have a more consistent 60-second cooldown reduction on this ability, and basically put your Boon of the Ascended on a 2-minute cooldown instead of a 3-minute cooldown, which will be pretty strong. The Necrolord one, Pallid Command, casting Unholy Nova summons a Maldraxxite champion to aid you for however many seconds, I think it was 10. Each time an ally is healed by Unholy Transfusion, your Maldraxxite champion's healing and damage done is increased by 1%, up to a whatever maximum. This is pretty question mark. We would have to know exactly how much it lasts, how much of a cap it is, to be able to get any judgment on this. Of course, the idea is that once you use Unholy Transfusion and it keeps ticking, the more it ticks, the more the champion is going to get increased healing and damage. But as long as we don't know the actual numbers of this guy, it's a pretty, unjudgeable type of legendary. Then we have the two other ones, the more confirmed ones. Buamsamdi's Pact. Each time you take damage from Shadow Word Death while your Fey Guardians are active, your Fairy's effectiveness is increased by 25%. This is interesting because, of course, it mostly just has Shadow Priest in mind, right? The one who constantly and consistently uses Shadow Word Death. The other two specs, not really. Pretty much the only exciting part about this legendary is for Mythic plus Shadow Priests, pretty much. If they are playing with Death and Madness, which is going to reset the cooldown of Shadow Word Death if the target dies within 4 seconds, so you can continuously use Shadow Word Death, something like this, to gain massive effect from your fairies. That will be the only effect that could make this legendary interesting. And lastly, we have the weirder one, Shadow Word Manipulation for Ventir. Mind Games gains 1 additional charge and its cast time is increased by 50%. Yes, that reads correctly. It goes from being a 1.5 second cast to being a 2.25 second cast. Now, what is the point here? Number one, Discipline Priest has a pretty tight window when they want to do as much damage as possible within their Spirit Shell window to give as much of an absorb shield as possible. So lengthening the cast time of Mind Games, which is one of the things they cast during this window, seems pretty dumb. There is one thing though, giving them the additional charge. So why is this good? Now, it can be good on the down low because Schism has a 24-second cooldown and Mind Games has a 45-second cooldown. Obviously, maths, they do not line up, which means every time Schism is available, you won't be able to use it with Mind Games. You won't be able to increase the damage of Mind Games together with the spell damage buff given by Schism. With an extra charge of Mind Games, you will be able to line up your Mind Games with your Schism, which is very good. There is a problem, though. The problem is that you are still mostly centered around Spirit Shell as a Discipline Priest, which has a 1-minute cooldown. So you already have absolutely no trouble as a Discipline Priest lining up Schism and Mind Games with Spirit Shell because the cooldown of Spirit Shell is 60, soon to be nerfed to 90. So even easier to line it up. It's going to happen even less often. And then there is the last of the options with this. the fact that you could bank 2 charges to use at the same time, or in the same window on the same target, or maybe on 2 different targets during your damage window. Because when you go for Spirit Shell and the whole rotation, sure you have Schism, which is good for damage, sure you have Penance, sure you have Mind Blast, but then, you know, you have a bunch of smites, and adding an extra Mind Games would be more powerful. Also, just to reiterate, very handily, with the 2 charges of Mind Games, you would have 45 seconds on 2 charges, 90 seconds to get them both. The nerfed cooldown of Spirit Shell, 90 seconds. So you would be able to have both charges of Mind Games at the same time out, whenever you want to Spirit Shell. So it could be interesting to use. To be fair, priests have gone quite a bit of time with this double power infusion legendary, because a lot of the legendaries weren't that powerful, particularly. You do have now Holy Priests having a lot of power put into Flesh Concentration as a legendary, so it's very hard to be able to move Holy Priest away from Flesh Concentration. Shadow Priests as well, in Mythic Plus, they have been re-given their AoE legendary. Their Shadow Flame Prism has gotten buffed again. Yes, it's getting nerfed again after getting buffed, but it's still pretty strong in AoE, so in Mythic Plus it would be pretty weird to find them change this legendary. Maybe, as I mentioned, the Bwomsam Dispact, if it functions with Death and Madness, it could be strong. Then again, it would be pretty tricky and frustrating to play, because you have to use Shadow Word Death, but you don't have to kill the target, otherwise you don't take damage, which means the legendary isn't proccing, so that's probably more complicated. People would just rather go for Shadow Flame Prism and have an easier time. And then you have Discipline as well, who has Clarity of Mind, which is very, very powerful in raid encounters. And then in Mythic Plus, you have more possibilities, particularly for Discipline Priest. You know, in Mythic Plus, they are pretty open in the legendaries they can use, and not because they have many good, they have many average legendaries. So there could be one in here that overtakes the current legendaries being used by Discipline in Mythic Plus. But for now, we can stop here with the new legendaries added in this new build of the 9.1 PTR. These 2 videos, this one and the balance tuning, were the big brunt of the changes when it comes to tuning, when it comes to, you know, character power. We're gonna go over things like the Mega Dungeon, the raid, the character models, the mount and pet rewards and whatnot, probably tomorrow, but this was the important stuff that had to come out first. So, thank you guys for watching the video. If you enjoyed this, you should think about subscribing. If you did not enjoy this, well, okay, fine. Okay, you know what? Fine. I'll just let you be. See you guys soon, and in the meantime, Blizzard, hello? Where is Monk? Hello?